Welcome back. We're now going to be jumping into the Jephthah story. We just looked at Abimelech and saw how he is the fruit of Gideon, and he's like a foreign king, so he's dealt with like a foreign king and eradicated from the land. And then we had our interlude where we saw these other judges rise up, and they were acting just like kings. So the paradigm is now set. Israel wants a human king, and they're looking for a human king, and Yahweh is no longer their king. So let's jump into the Jephthah story real quick, and we'll pick this up again. So basically, all of chapter 11 and a little bit of chapter 12 covers the Jephthah story. And let's get straight into the scripture, and we're going to sort of at the very beginning look at Jephthah's pedigree. So let's jump into that. Judges chapter 11, verse 1. Now Jephthah the Gileadite, the son of a prostitute, was a mighty warrior. Already at the front end, his very first introduction into the scripture, what do we read? He is the son of a prostitute. So what should we be expecting when we're looking at the Jephthah story? Well, if he's the son of a prostitute, that probably means he's illegitimate. Kind of in the Ehud story where it says he was a Benjaminite, a son of the right hand, but his right hand was crippled. This is sort of the same idea bringing to the Jephthah story, that there's going to be some deficiency or flaw in him because of where he has come from. He is a son of a prostitute. Although he's a mighty warrior, but still son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah away, saying to him, "You shall not inherit anything in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Now, Gilead was the father of Jephthah. This could be taken to understand because sex plays such a big role in Judges. We've seen that as one of the underlying themes through a lot of the other themes of Judges, that sex is a driving force. It drives a lot of people to do things. We see it come up here when Jephthah is the son of a prostitute. We're going to see it in the Samson story when he takes on the Philistine prostitutes and Delilah and stuff like that. Sex is a major driving force. And one of the things here that some of the commentators see is that Gilead is not seen as an individual man, but the whole tribe of Gilead. Let me see if I can pull this up here. So Gilead, so this is like the land of Gilead right here, right? And you have Gad right here, which is sort of like Gilead. So it's sort of thinking of that whole area as having slept with this woman because she is a prostitute, right? So it's more of a sense of Jephthah's father is the whole tribe of Gilead because his mother was a prostitute. Like, we don't know who his real father is, right? So when it says Gilead's wife bore him other sons and his wife grew up, they drove him away. It's just like he was driven away from the tribe of Gilead or Gad because of the prostitution of his mother. So it's just a little interesting insight. So verse 3, and then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. Outlaws collected around Jephthah and went raiding with him. After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. So if we go to our map here, we can see here's the land of Tob, which is in Ammon. This is like the land of the Ammonites, and here's the land of Gilead. So these people are really close together, but he's driven out of the promised land, so to speak, to the land of Tob, closer to the Ammonites because his mother was a prostitute. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. Why? Because Jephthah was a mighty warrior. But notice the elders are doing this. Where's the call of Yahweh to deliver? Verse 6, they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our commander so that we may fight the Ammonites." Okay. But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Are you not the very ones who rejected me and drove me out of my father's house? So why do you come to me now when you are in trouble?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "Nevertheless, we have now turned back to you so that you may go with us and fight with the Ammonites and become head over us, over all the inhabitants of Gilead." Really? This guy that you drove out because he's the son of a prostitute, you're now going to make him king over Gilead if he fights the Ammonites? Let's see what happens. Verse 9. Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you bring me home again to fight with the Ammonites, and Yahweh gives them over to me, I will be your head. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, Yahweh will be witness between us. We will surely do as you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before Yahweh at Mizpah. Okay, so they sort of make a deal here. One of the interesting things you need to know about Jephthah is his name means he opens, meaning he opens his mouth. Jephthah is a negotiator. And we see him here with the elders of Gilead negotiating. And he basically makes a deal. I'll fight the Ammonites if you make me head over all of you, but we will bring Yahweh into it. Not in the sense that we want to worship Yahweh and love him, because obviously Jephthah wants to be king, but as a way to make a vow to hold one another to something, right? Like we say, I swear to God, right? And we usually say it half-heartedly. That's sort of what's happening here. And so the great negotiator, Jephthah, makes a deal with the elders of Gilead. Now, the negotiator, Jephthah, is about to go and talk with the king of the Ammonites and try and make a deal with him. Let's see how this goes. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said, What is there between you and me that you have come to me to fight against my land? Reasonable question. Verse 13, the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, Because Israel, on coming from Egypt, took away my land from the Arnon to the Jabbok and to the Jordan, now therefore restore it peaceably. So you took land when you came out of Egypt. Well, Jephthah is going to respond to this. Once again, Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to them, Thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites, but when they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, Let us pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not listen. They also sent to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. So what he's talking about here is down here in the south. Let me actually change my map real quick. Down in the south, here we go. They came out of Egypt, right? This is Egypt. They wandered around in the wilderness. They went down to Mount Sinai here. Then they came back up to Kadesh, right? This is the Kadesh area, wanting to go into the promised land either through this way, but the warriors were too mighty, so they couldn't do that. But then they came up here to the doorstep of Edom and said, Hey, can we pass through your land? And they said no. Moab also said no. So they waited at Kadesh. That's what Jephthah is rehearsing right now. Verse 18, Then they journeyed through the wilderness, went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab, arrived on the east side of the land of Moab, and camped there on the other side of the Arnon. They did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. So what he's talking about here is they basically marched around Edom this way, or maybe they cut through this way, but they went around. And they went around Moab, and here's that Arnon. This is like a river valley or something like that. So they went around and came up into this area because Moab is marked off by this boundary. That's what Jephthah's saying. Israel then sent messengers to King Sihon of the Amorites and the king of Heshbon. And Israel said to him, Let us pass through your land to our country. So the king of Heshbon right here. Let us pass through here because we want to get into here. But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory, so Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. Is Jahaz on this map? It is not, but it's probably somewhere in that same vicinity. Verse 21, Then Yahweh, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people in the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel occupied all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country. They occupied all the territory of the Amorites from the Arnon to the Jabbok and from the wilderness to the Jordan. So now Yahweh, the God of Israel, has conquered the Amorites for the benefit of his people Israel. Do you intend to take their place? Should you not possess what your God Chemosh gives you to possess? Possess? And should we not be the ones to possess everything that Yahweh our God has conquered for our benefit? Now let's pause here for a second. It sounds like Jephthah is putting the god Chemosh on the same level as Yahweh. Should you not possess what your God gives you? And should we not possess what our God gives us? Well, wait a second. Yahweh is king of all. Chemosh is no god. It sounds like he's sort of putting them on the same level. We'll come back to that. Verse 25. Now, are you any better than King Balak, son of Zippor of Moab? Did he ever enter into conflict with Israel, or did he ever go to war with them? While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and the Aor and its villages, and on all the towns that are along the Arnon, 300 years, why did you not recover them within that time? Because it's kind of like you're late to the party. This is 300 years later. Why are you now complaining? I lost my track here. I think we're at verse 27. It is not I who have sinned against you, but you are the one who does me wrong by making war on me. Yet let Yahweh, who is judge, decide today for Israel or for the Ammonites. Verse 28, and this is key. But the king of the Ammonites did not heed the message that Jephthah sent to him. So Jephthah, the one who opens his mouth, the great negotiator, fails at negotiating. Why are we not surprised? Well, one of the things that is hard to see in the text, in the scripture here, is this line right here. Should you not possess what your God Chemosh gives you to possess? Remember, we're talking about the Amorite king, right? Where does it say here? But the king of the Ammonites, the king of the Ammonites did not say, or did not heed his message. What God is the God of the Ammonites? It's not Chemosh. Should you not possess what your God Chemosh gives you to possess? Should you not possess what your God Chemosh gives you to possess? Jephthah is mistaken here. Typically, the god of the Ammonites is linked with the god Molech, not Chemosh. Chemosh is the god of Moab. So here, in his great negotiation, in his great speech, his spiel to the king of the Ammonites, Jephthah mistakens their God. Instead of saying to your God Molech, he says to your God Chemosh, which Chemosh is for Moab. But we're not talking about the Moabites. We're talking about the Ammonites. So here Jephthah fails in his great negotiation because he doesn't know his history. He negotiates with the Ammonites, but he has a mistaken history. Why? Because he is the fruit of a prostitute. Prostitutes, talking in generic terms and with my ancient eyes on, are people who do not understand what's going on because they violate Yahweh's way. And so the fruit of a prostitute, Jephthah, it would not surprise us that he would have a mistaken history or an uninformed history, that he doesn't know his history, he doesn't know the foreign gods, and that he doesn't know Yahweh's way. Because what we're going to see here is that Jephthah has negotiated with Gilead and been successful. He's negotiated with the Ammonites and has been unsuccessful. And he's going to try and negotiate with Yahweh, and it will end up bringing ruin to Jephthah. Because God is not negotiated with, because he is king over all Israel and king of the universe. You do not negotiate with God in the sense that Jephthah is trying to do it, in the sense of manipulation and appeasement. It doesn't work like that. With foreign gods, it may work like that, but foreign gods are nothing. Yahweh is everything. And what we see here is that the fruit of a prostitute, Jephthah, doesn't know his history because a prostitute does not know Yahweh's ways. So it's no surprise that Jephthah doesn't understand Yahweh or the foreign gods or know the history of Israel correctly, because he is the fruit of a prostitute. And as a result of that, the Ammonite king is not swayed by his negotiation. The great negotiator Jephthah fails in negotiating because he doesn't know. He's the fruit of a prostitute. You reap what you sow. God is not mocked. And he's also not manipulated. So let's continue on in our scripture here. Then the Spirit of Yahweh came upon Jephthah. Now, this is probably the only place where you could say that Jephthah is a judge, because the Spirit came upon him. But notice, there's no prophet sent. There's no encounter where Jephthah is commissioned to be deliverer over Israel. It's only assumed in the text and sort of brought to light right here. But that's it. Because God is becoming quiet because he has been rejected. And the whole paradigm of the downward spiral is breaking down as we get lower and lower and lower because things are getting so chaotic that now there's no formal introduction of the deliverer of Israel. This is how bad things are getting, and it's only going to get worse. Oh, Lord have mercy. And he passed through Gilead and Manasseh. He passed out on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. So he's rallying people and he's going to confront the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to Yahweh. The great negotiator, fruit of a prostitute, is about to make a deal with Yahweh. This is not going to go well. And he said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whoever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return victorious from the Ammonites shall be Yahweh's, to be offered up by me as a burnt offering. Do you think that would even please Yahweh? You don't know his ways, Jephthah. And so you're thinking you're making a deal with him, but you're really not. You're only going to bring hurt on yourself because that type of action of human sacrifice is not pleasing to Yahweh. It may be to Chemosh or Molech or the other foreign gods, but it is not pleasing to Yahweh. And Jephthah, the great negotiator, is going to eat his words. Verse 32, so Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and Yahweh gave them into his hand. He inflicted a massive defeat from the Aor to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 towns as far as Abel Keramim. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. He's given victory. God kept his end of the bargain, so to speak, although it never says God accepted this. But what is Jephthah going to do, the great negotiator? Now he needs to keep his end. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, right? So we're set up. Whoever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me will be offered up as a burnt offering. Okay, well, now here he is. He came home. Who's going to meet him? And there was his daughter. Lord have mercy. Coming out to meet him with timbrels and with dancing, rejoicing because her father was victorious. She was his only child. He had no son or daughter except her. Right? This just drives it in even more clearly. This is devastating. Verse 35, when he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. She was trying to celebrate with him, right? But you have brought me very low. Why? Because of the words of your own mouth, Jephthah. You have become the cause of great trouble to me, for I opened my mouth. Remember, is one who opens, the implication being his mouth. For I have Jephthah'd to Yahweh, and I cannot take back my vow. He sought to manipulate God, and he found out he was the one holding the stick. Verse 36, she said to him, my father. Notice what his daughter says, how she responds. Here is one, a woman, a girl who shouldn't have understanding, displaying it. She said to him, my father, if you have opened your mouth to Yahweh, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth. Now that Yahweh has given you vengeance against your enemies, the Ammonites. What's she saying? You honor Yahweh. You made a vow, you better follow it through. She is displaying understanding of Yahweh's ways more than Jephthah. And this is just a little girl. Verse 37, and she said to her father. Now, the daughter of a negotiator is now going to negotiate. Let this thing be done for me. Grant me 2 months so that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my companions and I. Go, he said, and sent her for 2 months. She's successful in her negotiation. She departed, she and her companions, and bewailed her virginity on the mountaintops, or on the mountains. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to the vow he had made. She had never slept with a man, so there arose an Israelite custom that for 4 days every year the daughters of Israel would go out to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. She understood Yahweh's ways and helped her father keep his vow, even though it meant her death. Yahweh is not manipulated. Jephthah made a rash vow because he's a negotiator. He sought to manipulate Yahweh to have his insurance policy saying that, hey, if you do this, give me victory, then I'll do this for you. But that's not how Yahweh works. We learn that in Exodus 34. He's kind, loving, and the king of all the universe. He does not need to be appeased or manipulated. He's just kind and loving. He gives grace. Jephthah did not understand this because why? He's the fruit of a prostitute. But yet Jephthah's fruit, his daughter, is like a reversal because she displays purity. She's a virgin, unlike Jephthah's mother, who is a prostitute. His daughter is a virgin and she's pure. And she corrects the negative sexual thing going on in the scripture at this point. And not all is corrupted. And she displays understanding of Yahweh's ways by saying, Dad, you better keep your vow that you made to Yahweh, because he is not mocked. But the daughter is the one who pays the price, not really Jephthah. She pays it with her life, because she's the one who truly honors God by remaining pure through all of this and honoring God by the vow that her father had made. So here, in a very, I don't even know how you call it, terrible way, you see the beauty of God come out in the daughter of Jephthah and her understanding of Yahweh's ways and her willingness to remain pure through all of it. It's like a correction. But we see here, Yahweh is not manipulated. No, he is not. Not at all. And this great negotiator, Jephthah, negotiating with Yahweh, but it doesn't work out because because Yahweh is not a little God. He's not a little G God. He's not like Chemosh or Molech or Dagon or what are the other gods? Or Asherah or Baal. He's not like those gods at all, who want to be appeased and manipulated. So we see this happening here. Jephthah's daughter showing more wisdom than her father, and her father being corrected in his, but it's costing him the very thing that he cherishes the most is his daughter, because it's his only daughter. He had no sons or daughters besides just the one. So he ends up losing everything because he thinks God can be manipulated. And the great negotiator ends up with nothing, because you think of a negotiator, they end up with something more than what they started with. But Jephthah here ends up losing everything. And the story's not even over yet. There's more. The men of Ephraim. Oh, Ephraim has been such a thorn in the side of everyone else in Israel. They keep complaining. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over to fight the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house down over you." Oh my gosh, guys, just settle down. Jephthah said to them, "My people and I were engaged in conflict with the Ammonites who oppressed us severely, but when I called to you..." So Jephthah did call, but they didn't answer. "When I called you, you did not deliver me from their hand. When I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and Yahweh gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" And just like in the previous story with Gideon and his confrontation with the Ephraimites, Jephthah's in the right. We called you guys. You didn't want to come help. So why are you getting upset with me now? But notice here, the anger is not abated like it was in the Gideon story. Here Jephthah, because remember, he lost his girl. Here Jephthah showing no mercy. Verse 4. Then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim. So you not only have Jephthah fighting the Ammonites and subduing them for Gilead, you now have Gilead fighting Ephraim, right? And this is a major battle. And the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim because they said, "You are fugitives from Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the heart of Ephraim and Manasseh." So they have a lot of resentment built up. Then the Gileadites took the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. Whenever one of the fugitives said, "Let me go over," the men of Gilead would say to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" When he would say no, they said to him, "Then say Shibbotheth." And he would say Sibbotheth, or he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell at that time. So this is a major conflict of Israel against Israel, and it's the downward spiral, and Israel is no different than the people of the land, and so they're fighting one another, and there's no more unity, and there's even discrimination based upon what they say. Now, I know we don't know anything about that type of stuff, about people being against other people based upon what they say or what they stand for, but here you have, of the one nation, such division, and really petty division. How does it end? Jephthah served or judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah died and was buried in his town in Gilead. So, the story ends like almost all of the other stories that we've looked at so far. Israel is now fighting Israel again. This is the downward spiral. It keeps getting worse. This is what happens when you reject Yahweh as king over your life. It's the downward spiral. There's division. There's conflict. There's brutality and treachery and cunning. And you see all these things happening again and again in these stories, and they're being recapitulated, and really they're becoming worse and worse, more and more intense. It is the downward spiral for sure. Practical application. Vows are dangerous. Jephthah, the great negotiator, negotiates. He makes a vow, and it ends up falling back on his head. He thinks he's being wise, strong-arming God into giving him victory because he's going to give God something in return, but it comes back on his head because God's not manipulated. He doesn't need a vow. So one of the things you need to understand, don't vow. You don't need to, so just don't do it. Let's look at the scripture here. We want to go to, Matthew 5, 33 to 37. Again, you have heard that it was said, this is Jesus doing the Sermon on the Mount. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to Yahweh. But I say to you, this is Jesus talking to his disciples, I say to you, do not swear at all. Either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. You don't have any power to carry out what you're saying, so don't say anything at all. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. If you're going to do it, do it. If not, not. Don't make a vow. That's from Jesus. Because we don't have the capacity to keep it. So don't make a vow. And you don't need to promise God anything. God doesn't need anything from you. He is a kind, loving, gracious God. We saw that in Exodus 34. We see that all throughout the New Testament. In Jesus, how he heals people and says that he loves people. We don't need to make a promise to God. We don't need to promise him anything as if making the promise will make him like us more. That's not how this works. God does not need us, but he wants us. You don't need to make a promise to God, because any promise you make, guess what? You don't have the capacity to keep it. You don't. Vows are very dangerous. Now, I know we take marriage vows and stuff, and that's seen in sort of a different light, but also a similar light. I mean, can you keep your marriage vows? You need to make them very seriously, but also understand you got to walk in the grace of God if you want to keep those, because it's God who's really keeping those through you. Anyways, he already gives you grace knowing your true nature. You don't need to try and manipulate God saying, I'll be good if you do this or whatever. He already knows you through and through, and he chooses to give you grace anyways. There's nothing more you need to do. There's no promise or vow you need to make. And God is not manipulated by making a deal. Remember Jephthah, the great negotiator. God is not manipulated by making a deal. You don't make deals with God. That's not how he works. He doesn't work through manipulation or appeasement. It's not like that. All he wants is you to respond in love by following his ways, because it's for your own good. It's for your own good. So remember that. Also want to point out Jephthah's daughter. She's a good example. She keeps the vow even to the point of death, and she recognizes the seriousness of a vow to Yahweh. So she keeps it. She demonstrates some wisdom. But it cost her her life because her father was the one making the rash vow. and not really paying attention to what he was doing. So there's your application. If you can, don't make a vow. You don't have the capacity to keep it, and God's not expecting it of you. So we had sort of the different stories in that interlude. Now here's kind of where things sort of wrap up a little bit, this ending scripture here. Oh, go back to Judges real quick. Was it Judges 12, 8 and something? Here we go. After him, Ibzan, we'll go with that. Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons. Here we go again. Reestablishing of the kingly paradigm. He gave his 30 daughters in marriage outside his clan. Oh, outside your clan, buddy. And brought in 30 young women from outside for his sons. He judged Israel 7 years. Already you have a recipe for disaster. You keep things within your same clans, so to speak. Then he died. After him, Elon, the Zebulonite, judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. Then Elon died, and he was buried in Ahijalon in the land of Zebulun. After him, Abdon, son of Hiel, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. He judged Israel 8 years. Then he died and was buried. So we have here a recapitulation of the judges being more like kings. Look at these descriptors used. The amount of sons and daughters and what they were riding on, the donkeys, and the locations where they were buried. This is all how you would describe a king. And one of the biggest things is not what's there, it's what's not there. Yahweh's not mentioned at all. And this sets us up for Samson. What should we be expecting for Samson in light of all this? A man who totally disregards Yahweh. How much worse can it get? It still gets a lot worse. We're going to see this in the epilogue, the very ending of Judges. It gets really, really bad. But all of this so far is setting us up. Because remember, the downward spiral, each spiral is connected one to the other, but it has direction. It's going somewhere, and it's tightening up because the chaos is getting worse and worse and worse, and things are disintegrating, and we're moving from that Othniel paradigm all the way down to the Samson paradigm, and this is not good stuff. So what did we learn? Abimelech is a foreign king, and he reaped what he sowed. He reaped what he sowed. He was the fruit of Gideon, and he also reaps what he sows by being killed in a similar way that he killed all of his other brothers. Jephthah is an uninformed negotiator. He's the fruit of a prostitute, and he doesn't know his history, he doesn't know Yahweh's ways, and he doesn't understand the foreign gods, and it gets him in trouble. He too reaped what he sowed. And his daughter, the innocent, the pure one, the one who does demonstrate wisdom in Yahweh's ways, is the one who pays the ultimate price because she gives up her life so that her father, Jephthah, can keep his vow that he made rashly. And we also saw that these smaller judges, they set up the kingship paradigm. They help reinforce it. Israel has made its choice. They want a human king in place of Yahweh. And it's as simple as that. Because remember, the book opens up with Yahweh being king over Israel, and the very last verse of Judges finishes off with there was no king in Israel, or at least they're on their way to being a human king. So for next time, I want you to look at the character story of Samson. That's basically chapter 13 through chapter 16. So read that and sort of know that, understand what's going on in there. And there's a couple things I want you to be able to think about through that process. Think about from the beginning of Judges up until the point of Samson. What has happened so far? Just take like a mental recap of the different judging stories and what we've learned through that. And then I want you to think, how is the Samson story the fruit of Israel's doing? How does it make so much perfect sense that this is where we are when it comes to the story when we reach Samson? Because it does make sense. It fits the downward spiral. But I want you to kind of start putting the pieces together because we're starting near the end and we need to make sure that we're having a working understanding of how all of this works together. We're not just looking at individual character stories and saying, well, what can we learn from Gideon? What can we learn from Jephthah? What can we learn from Ehud? Although you can, we want to take it as a whole and learn the main theological point that the writer of Judges is trying to tell us. So I want you to be thinking about that in the Samson story. Also, this maybe is a little bit more extra credit, but it would be helpful for you to do this. Compare Samson's birth story with Samuel's birth story. Samuel is like the last judge, although he's not in Judges. He's in 1 Samuel. But I want you to compare their birth stories and see what are the similarities. Because you're going to see a lot of similarities between the two, and you're going to see Samson is a good example of a bad example, and Samuel is a good example of a good example. He's sort of a reversal of the Samson story. But I want you to look at their birth stories and see where they line up of being very similar and stuff. So that's all I have for you today, and I will see you in the next one where we will pick up with Samson.